Hello, this is a quick video on the Hebrew accents. The accents are really cantillation. They were for chanting in the Middle Ages. The Tiberian system, which is what is printed in most Hebrew Bibles today, is medieval. It's not important other than it's helpful in knowing where the stress is on a verb for pronunciation. There are a lot of accents. I don't know all of them. I know a few of the key ones. But they're really not that important. But they do tell you where to put the stress when you're pronouncing, and it's okay to know a little bit. So let me just give you a quick rundown of Hebrew accents. Okay, so accents help you know kind of the layout of a verse. There are two kinds of accents. There are the conjunctive and disjunctive. Seems like there are a whole lot more disjunctive than there are conjunctive. But like, for example, and these again there are several systems. The Tiberian ones are the ones that are printed in the modern Hebrew Bibles. And these were used for chanting. So in the middle and end of a verse, you have the two disjunctive accents. At the end of the verse, you have this kind of colon-like thing called the sof pasuk. I'm not even sure I would call it an accent, but it fits into this video. At the end of a verse, you've got the two dots that look like a colon. It's kind of like a period. That's the end of a verse, and of course the end of the breath of saying a verse. The final word of a verse, the final Hebrew word of a verse, will often have what's called a saluk, and a saluk is just a little line, right there, up and down, that tells you what the stressed syllable is. These are in addition to the vowels. They're not vowels. They're kind of, this is where the accent goes. Sometimes the final, I believe the final word of a verse will be in what's called a pausal form, which lengthens some of the vowels, as I recall. So it's worth knowing. It's definitely worth knowing what the sof pasuk is at the end of the verse, and then the saluk is the accent usually at the last word of a verse. The other main accent to know, I would say, is the atnak. And the atnak is kind of in the middle of a verse. Not exactly in the middle. It's not like count the words and divide in two. It's not like that. It's more of, this is kind of the meaning middle of the verse. And that's the atnak. These are really the most important ones right there. The ones to know. The sof pasuk, which may or may not be considered even an accent. It's the end of a sentence. End of a verse. The saluk, which is the accent on the last word of a verse. And the atnak in the kind of meaning middle of a verse. Okay, those are the big ones. Here are some other ones that again, there's so many of them. I don't know them all. You can look them up, online if you want to know them. There is this one, the munak, a munak. I always think of it as kind of like, here's the next word. See how it's kind of pointing toward the next word? It's conjunctive. And a lot of times this will be a hint that you're looking at a construct. Construct is where the ring of fire, ring of is construct, as we'll see eventually as we go through the Hebrew language. And so that ring of fire kind of goes together, and so the munak is like, hey, this next word goes with me, and so that's okay to know. The accents do kind of point toward the next word if they're conjunctive. If they say, well, I kind of go with what follows in some way. A lot of times they'll kind of point toward what follows if that's the case. So like the munak says, I go together with the word that comes after, with the stuff that comes after. Here's a couple others that kind of point. So there's the slidey merkah. That again, instead of the hard munak, it's the slidey, what comes after. And then the mapak, you can see, is like an arrow pointing at what comes after. And so again, these are not important necessarily to have memorized, but they can be hints, right? Because they're kind of pointing at the next word, they can like, psst, I go with what goes after. So that can be helpful to know in terms of the conjunctive accents. There are other disjunctive accents. So I've mentioned the atnak that kind of says divide the verse in half here. The saluk, we're now at the end of the verse. Sof pasuk, this verse is done. There are some other disjunctives that maybe if you go from the beginning of the verse to the atnak, or from the atnak to the end of the verse, if you divide kind of the first half and the second half in half, then you've got something called the zakef katon. And this is an accent that looks like a shavah, but it's above the word. And so the zakef katon kind of says, we're halfway to the atnak, or we're halfway from the atnak to the saluk. And so that's a disjunctive that divides the verse into quarters, as it were, the first quarter and the third quarter. And then you could, if you divide the bit from the beginning to the zakef katon, and the bit from the zakef katon to the atnak, and the bit from the atnak to the zakef katon, and the bit, when you divide it into eighths, then you've got the reviyah. And the reviyah is kind of like a little diamond. Accent like a diamond, that's on top of the eighth, as it were. Again, not important to know. The most important thing to know is that these accents are telling you where the stress, the primary stress is on a word. There are other miscellaneous marks. I'll just throw them in here. So this is a somewhat synoptic video. So I've already mentioned the makaf or makaf. Let's call the whole thing off. Is a dash, and it's up high, but it connects two words together in terms of their sound. There's another one. It's not really an accent. The meteg. It looks like a saluk. It can mark a long vowel, not always, but it can kind of help you see that a kamatz or shavah follows. A kamatz kadol, which is the long a kamatz, that's long, and a shavah only appears in an open syllable, the vocal schwa, that is. And so a saluk that marks a long vowel can hint that what follows is a kamatz gadol or a vocal schwa. Again, looks like a meteg, like a saluk, but it's something called a meteg. And then we've mentioned the mapik, which is a dot. It's not a dagesh, but it's a dot in a final consonantal hey. So there you have Miscellaneous Marks by Ken Shank. Well, let's just look at this Jonah 1:4, which is the verse we're going to jump into in the next video, if you're watching these videos in sequence. But I wanted to show you the accents in this. So the first word is the word for God, and we're going to learn what that vav is at the beginning in the next video. That's a meteg, not a saluk, because saluk is at the end of the word. But basically, it doesn't tell you where the accent is. Meteg can tell you where a secondary accent is. So that's another thing. The meteg can both signify a long vowel, which it's not doing here, but it can also signify secondary accent. But here we have the reviyah, which is on the first word in this particular case. And then here we have the arrow, which is a conjunctive. This is the mapak. Again, it's saying, I go with what goes next. The subject, Ruach Gadulah, is a great wind. The Lord sent a great wind. And so that arrow is saying, I go with what comes after. In fact, what comes after is the subject of this. A great wind blew, and the Lord blew a great wind, as it were. Actually, it's not the subject. The Lord is the subject. But the Lord blew a great wind, or caused a great wind to blow. This one here is a pashta. I didn't tell you about those, but it's pointing toward the next word. So keep on going, right? Keep going. So reviyah is the one that divides it into eighths. The mapak is saying this goes with what comes next. The pashta, this comes with what goes next. And then here we have the zakef katon, which is on top. It says we're now halfway to the atnak, roughly. And then here's if this one was a curve pointing at the top, here's a curve pointing at the end, the merkah. Again, conjunctive, saying keep going, I go with what comes after. So this is, and it was a great gust. So again, this goes with what comes after it. There's a meteg, not an accent. This is a tifka. It is another disjunctive because it's pointing away. And then we get the next line. There's the atnak. So now we are, as far as the meaning of the verse, halfway through the verse. There's another zakef katon, because now we're halfway from the atnak to the end. It's all very rough, right? There's another tifka, and then finally a saluk in the last syllable, and there's a sof pasuk, here at the end. You've got two accents in this word: the munach, which is I go with what comes after, and then the zakef katon. Again, there's no great meaning here. Roughly, the atnak is halfway through, and then you've got the zakef katon halfway to the atnak and halfway from the atnak. You've got here the reviyah there. There's no reviyah in the second half. But anyway, and roughly you have these conjunctive ones that are kind of pointing. This goes with what comes next. This goes with what comes next, and so forth. Not that important to know, but I thought I would do a quick video talking just a little bit about the Hebrew accents.